Today I'm in the wood yard, we're talking firewood. What to look for to get the best firewood you can possibly get. Here we go. So right off the bat, I just want to say this is by no means going to be everything you need to look for when it comes to buying firewood or to know when your wood is ready to burn, when it's fully seasoned, fully dry, good to go stuff. I'm going to cover kind of some basics. I just went through my wood yard. I walked around for about a half an hour. I pulled a bunch of pieces out here just to show you examples of different stages of drying or not dry, problems that can come out, things to look for, like this mold growing here or fungus, stuff like that. There are a lot of things that go into producing firewood that a lot of people don't realize how important it is. Number one is time. The longer wood dries, the drier it'll be. It's just pretty much that simple. Most wood will take 6 months to a year to dry. If you split it smaller like this, it will dry much faster. There's no bark on it. It's fully open, and this is a piece of hard maple here, and this has been cut now for, I don't know, 7 to 8 months, and at 3 to 4 months it was already dry. Here's another piece of hard maple. This one here, as you can see, it's split all the way down, cracked all the way through from side to side. And this one also is about the same age. Maple dries very fast. Now, the reason I bring this up is different kinds of wood dry at different speeds. Most oak species dry very slow. Hickory dries slow. And the reason I bring those up is they're pretty common kinds of wood. Now, like I said, this is by no means going to cover all kinds of wood, or might not even cover the wood that you have in your area, depending on where you live. If you're in the East Coast, West Coast, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, whatever country you're watching this from, Canada, Alaska, there's a lot of different kinds of wood in different areas that I don't have here. Stuff like madrone, stuff like Osage orange, almond wood. What's some other stuff I hear? Eucalyptus, gum wood. There's a lot of things we don't have here, but I am in Wisconsin and we do have about 4 dozen kinds of hardwood that we have to burn and probably a dozen kinds of softwood. So we have a lot of different choices here, and that's true of a lot of places in the Midwest and in the East of the United States. In Canada, it's probably a little bit more limited. I know they don't have as many different kinds of wood. They have quantity of wood, that's for sure. In Alaska, they have a lot less kinds of wood. On the West Coast, they have also less kinds of wood, especially if you go up into, say, Washington State, Oregon. You know, they might only have 6 or 7 different species that they can cut in any kind of quantity. Yeah, they may have a lot of different kinds of trees, but the volume of trees that you have available to you as far as species are going to be different from area to area. Some parts of Europe, they have 2 kinds of wood. They have spruce and they have birch. That's it. It's like that in Alaska. They have spruce or spruce in some parts of Alaska. I've been there, and I've been in areas of Alaska where I've done some moose hunting, and the only trees we saw were spruce. That was it. So, but maybe some willow brush and stuff like that. But as far as trees, spruce. So everywhere you go, it's going to be a little bit different. So you got to kind of look at your area as far as what's available and what you have to burn. I'm going to show you some things to look for. This is basic stuff here. So now I picked a day to do this when it was sunny so you could get the full sunlight. Now here is 2 pieces of hard maple. These are both fully dry, fully seasoned. I'm going to do this because some of the viewers like to hear this. I'm going to get a hold of this here. Listen to this. That's the sound of dry wood. If they were to be not dry, fresh cut, fresh split, it would be much more of a thud. You get more of a crack. Now that's one way to kind of know, but unless you do this a lot, you're probably not going to know the difference. If you do it a lot, you can kind of hear and feel it. And you can also feel the vibrations as it goes through it. It's kind of, I don't know, it's almost like hitting 2 bats together. It's just got a different feel to it. Now, some of the things people would look at, they would say, oh, look at this is mold starting on here. Very, very little bit of spotting on there. That is caused from some moisture as it's drying. This graying right here, yes, it's a kind of a fungus that will start to grow, but that gray means, or blackening, means that it's dry. If you look at the ends, you can see cracks going really deep all the way through here. If you see those cracks going all the way through. And so this is really dry wood. And I know it is because I have moisture tested all this. And that is really the only true way to know, is to take a moisture meter. It's a meter that has 2 prongs. You stick it into the wood and it tells you how much moisture is in the wood. That's really the only way to truly know, other than burning your wood. Something that I do quite often is I will split a piece in half and I will put it up to my lips. I actually put my lips against the wood because your lips are extremely sensitive to moisture. And if there's a lot of moisture, you can feel it right away. If it's really dry, you don't feel any moisture and it's not cool. It'll be the same temperature as the air, whereas if there's moisture on it, it'll actually feel cool to your lips. I know it sounds weird. I know it sounds strange when people see me talking about it, or if they see me kissing the wood, but it does work. So that's something. But splitting it open is very important. So that's something you can do if you really want to check it out. But these are 2 pieces of hard maple, different looks. So you can see they look totally different. Looking at the bark, you wouldn't know these are the same species, but they are. And so there on the inside, you can see it's hard maple. So that's one example. Here's another piece of hard maple. You can see how it's turning black on the edge. Very common for hard maple to do that. And on the inside, you can see this is extremely dry. You can see the cracks. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but there's cracks really deep all the way through there, and they run all the way down. So another piece of hard maple. This is a piece of soft maple. And I know that because I got it out of a pile where there was soft maple. Very light, much lighter than the hard maple. Also very dry. It also has spots on it, but this is soft maple. And I have another piece right here, if I can find it quick. Here it is. Right here is a piece of soft maple. You can see the cracks on this one go very deep all the way through. So another piece of soft maple. And again, if you listen to this, very dry. And I pulled this out of the barn. The reason I pulled this out is to show you what can happen if you don't split your wood and you put it into a dark place where there's moisture. The moisture was in the wood, the dark place was the barn. It's dry, but see all this growing in here? Look at the other end. See all this stuff growing? Now this is dry already. It's all dried off because this has been in the barn for 2 years. Now, if you get wood and it has mushrooms or lichens or some type of a fungus growing on it and it's still soft, if the mushrooms and the fungus are actually soft, oh, there's a spider. It's actually soft, that means the wood's not even dry yet. If it's dry, where you can just flake it off like this stuff is already dead. This fungus is dead, and the wood is fully dry. It's cracked all the way through, and I know it is because we split a piece of this open, and on the inside it is dry. But that is something to watch out for, especially if someone delivers to you solid pieces of wood, and if you don't see any cracking on the end, and I'll show you an example of that right now. Here's 2 pieces that were cut yesterday. This is a piece of box elder that I cut yesterday. You can see the end of it. Little bitty tiny crack starting because it does dry fast, but it's not been split yet. And if you look, you can even see in the cracks here that it actually looks wet. It doesn't look dry at all. This is a piece of elm. You can see here, no cracks in this at all. This is the end that was the butt. So this stuff has been cut for about 4 or 5 months. And you can see it's starting to crack. You're starting to get some spots on it here where it's weathering. But you look at the other side, how nice and clean it is. Not been split. Both of these pieces feel very, very heavy. And then here's an example of what it sounds like when you hit these together. You can tell the difference. Much more of a thud. These are not dry. They feel heavy. They look wet to me. And I know they're wet because I just cut them. Here's another example. This is a piece of poplar or aspen. If you look right here where the saw hit it, you can still see the green in there. The cambium here is still green. And if you look at the end, there's no splitting on it at all. This was the fresh cut end. This is the end from where it was cut a couple months ago. And you can see the crack is starting to develop there. But this feels very heavy. Here is a piece of soft maple, and you can see here too, it's a fresh cut in there, fresh cut on the end, no cracks. And again, I'm gonna wrap these together. Definitely more of a thud. And again, that's not the true way to test it. The true way is split it open, put a moisture meter on it, and actually find out how moisture. These feel very heavy. I would guess these are in a 40 percentile. You want your wood to be 20% or below to burn it. This is an example of wood that has not been split. This is a piece of locust. This I know is a year old because I know when it was cut. And it's got deep cracks all the way through. And now normally I would still split this. I would. Here's at the other end. You can see how it's cracking. And when I lift this, it's heavy, but locust is heavy wood. This is black locust, by the way. And this wood, I would have split in half because to me that's too thick of a piece because it's hard to pick up with one hand. I want my customers to be able to pick it up easily, and this is a little bit on the big side. So I would have cut this in half and it would have dried faster. Now I do know that it is dried because I have chopped this in half, split it, and I tested it, and it was like 17, 18%. because it was cut when it was dead standing, and it's been a year old since it's been drying. So it can be deceiving. Just because it's not split doesn't mean it's not dry, but generally you want it to be dry. Okay, now here's another example. These are both locusts, one with bark, one without bark. Both of them are cracked on the ends. Both of them were cut about a year ago. I've split pieces just like this apart, and in the inside, when I split them open, moisture tested them, 17, 18%. Very heavy wood, so it's very deceiving. You would think this would look like it was dry, but you pick it up and it's extremely heavy. But because it's black locust, it's very heavy, and it's dry, but it's heavy. Now, the reason I grabbed this one, I'm going to show you these two, about the same size. This is black locust, this is a piece of spruce. This feels like it weighs about 2 ounces. This feels like it weighs about 10 pounds. I wouldn't say 2 ounces, but much, much lighter than this piece of black locust. The end is cracked on it, but this was just cut, and it dries very fast. So spruce dries really fast, but softwood versus hardwood, this cuts like butter, this cuts like steel, this is light, this is heavy, this puts out heat, this puts out twice as much heat. Just saying. I have this out just to show you what a piece of basswood looks like. This is basswood. Now on this side here you can see freshly split. This was just split, I don't know, probably no more than a couple weeks ago. And this has been sitting out in the sun for a short amount of time, and look at how this is already starting to get weathered. It's starting to get the gray spots on it, and eventually this will look like this once it's weathered. You can see the difference between fairly fresh wood, very fresh wood, and wood that's been weathered for a year. Here's an example of 2 pieces of ash. Now this one was just split the other day. This one was split about a year ago. See how that's really gray? You can see the bark. Similar bark, both ash trees, positive, and you can see the inside. So when you see gray wood, that's a good indicator that it is dry. If you see something real bright, it's an indicator that it might not be dry, but it could be, because this could have been in the shade and an area where the sun is not hitting it, and it still can look like this. Sun and weather, I wouldn't say wind, but rain, and it can start to look gray like that. So I got another one to show you here. Here's a piece of hickory. Now you can see here where this edge right here is dark, and then it goes lighter, and then this side it's real gray. So piece of hickory, different colors. You can see by the bark here, that's a piece of hickory. Here is a piece of white birch, as you can see. Now, a lot of people look at this and think, well, that's freshly split. No, this was split 6-8 months ago, because I know I did split it, but it's been face down with the bark up. Some say that's right, some say that's wrong. I really don't care. But because the sun didn't hit it, it didn't really affect the color. But look at the end. See how that's been weathered? Because that was actually exposed to sunlight and rain. Now, another reason why I brought this out is to show you. See how the bark is starting to separate here? See the bark's coming off? That means it is getting dry. The drier it gets, the easier the bark will come off. And that's true of a lot of kinds of wood. Here's another piece of wood. This is a piece of beech. I can see by looking at it, you can see there's mushroomy things growing here, some funguses. And on the end here you can see some, but I do know this piece of wood is 2 years old because I know when it was split. And you can see that there are some fungus growing on. You know, that's one of the things to look for if you see this. And like I said, if they're soft, it's probably wet wood yet. But with time, it'll still dry out. This will still burn just fine. It doesn't hurt anything. It just looks kind of ugly, and people will look at it and say, ooh, ick. But nothing wrong with it. Piece of beech, it'll burn just fine. Here's another piece of basswood. You can see how it's getting weathered. This is about a year old. So you can see a piece of basswood. Look on the end, it's all real gray. Some people will think that's mold. It's just weathering is all it is. There is a little bit of mold right there. You can see that powdery stuff. This actually is a little bit of mold, but it's dry. This is super light, and it'll burn just fine. Okay, so here I have 2 kinds of white oak. This is true white oak, and this is bur oak, both members of the white oak family. Now this one's been split open, and you can see that it is dry. I can tell by how old it is. I know this stuff, I did test it, and this is about a year old. Actually, this piece right here is more like about 3 years old. And I did test a couple pieces just like this, and it was all 16, 15%. This piece right here was not split, And but I do know it's dry because I did split some just like it. You can see here there's a little bit of mold right there. Not a big deal, still gonna burn. But if you get wood that's just covered in mold and it still is soft mold and it feels wet and heavy, it probably is. So again, here you can see it's cracked. I did split some of these open along with this one, and I know all of these are 15–16%, so it's all good to burn. So that's white oak. And then here is some red oak. Now this red oak, this piece right here, you can see this side has kind of got that, it's kind of got that orangish kind of color, but then the other side is more gray because this side was facing up, this side was facing down. So again, like I said, that's another indicator. If you find wood that is more weathered and gray, that's actually a good thing because gray wood generally is dry wood. The sun is hitting it, rain is hitting it, so it's drying and going through the drying process. Now, this piece here doesn't have any cracking on it. It's not split anywhere, but I know that this is dry because this chunk of wood I cut probably 5 or 6 years ago because this came from a pile I got from my dad. You can see here that it's weathered on this end, but on this end it's not real weathered. There's a little bit of cracking there, but I have split this open and this wood right here is all 15–16%. So both red oak examples of kind of what it looks like. We'll put that to the side. Here's another piece of red oak, no bark. So I know when we cut this, it was dry already because I can tell by looking at it. Here you can see it's kind of got some green growth on it, but it's all dried up. That's not mold. Here you can see this end is cracked and the cracks go all the way through. This was when we cut it, and when we cut, I know the reason we didn't split this is we checked it and it was dry already. So we left it just like it was because this was more for heating wood. Here's another piece of oak. There's a couple little lichen things growing on here. Now this was just growing on the bark when we cut it because the tree was already dead because the bark was already dying. So you can see here what it looks like on the inside. So also another piece of red oak. Okay, so I found some other examples. I went digging through the piles here and I found some things. Now this is a good piece of cherry. See how solid this is? You can see the bark on it. A piece of cherry smells fantastic. And here's a piece of cherry that's not as good. See how that's got rot in the middle? Not as good because it is actually starting to flake apart. You can see how it's actually, you just take your hand and you can dig it apart. So it's getting what's called punky. What punky means is rot. It's just getting rot. Now that doesn't mean this won't burn, but it's starting to go. And I got another example of a different piece of wood here. This one right here is a piece of ash, believe it or not. I can tell because it's got a little good strip right here, but the rest of it, look at that. This is what's punky. This is rotten. This is a bad thing. Now this will still burn. It's not the end of the world, but that's not great. Okay, so here's a couple other pieces of wood. Now this one right here is a piece of ironwood. And I know it's ironwood because I can tell by looking at it. It's got that scaly look. Nice, solid wood. It looks real light, so it looks like it's not dry, but I do know because of the ends and where this was, the pile it was in, this is from over a year ago now. It's got cracks all the way through, but you would look at it and you might think, oh, it's not dry because it's not cracked. Well, but I do know I've tested this. This stuff is like 13–14%. Very dry, but because of the kind of wood it is, it's not going to necessarily look dry or feel dry because it's very heavy. This little bitty piece is just as heavy. Well, it's as heavy as some of the bigger pieces. So there you go, as an example of ironwood. The next one I have here is a piece of walnut. You can tell by the shimmer and the darkness it has down the middle here. Piece of walnut. If you look at the ends, you can see it's really cracked. It's weathered on the end, very light. Walnut's just average wood when it comes to firewood, but this is a very dry piece. Here is a piece of elm, and I can tell it's elm because it's all shredded and nasty. I also call it elm Satan wood. This is dry, not cracked, but this is over a year old, but there's a piece of elm that's dry. This one right here is a piece of basswood. I can tell by looking at it, it's basswood. It's got smooth bark to it, so this is a piece of limb wood. But if you see those specks in, a lot of people think, oh, it's moldy. No, it's just starting to weather. This is over a year old. It's very dry, very light. It's cracked all the way through the middle here. So that's a piece of basswood. The next chunk of wood I have here was just cut because I just cut it yesterday. You see there's no cracks whatsoever. You put your hand on it, it's actually cold. You can see moisture. You can actually see it. So if you see a piece of wood like this, somebody's trying to sell you, you see this light color through here? That's actual water. When I was cutting this, you could see the water coming out of it. We'll get to the other side here. So this is cottonwood. You can see the other side. cracked. So you'd think, oh, it's starting to be dry. And the bark's starting to come off. Oh, it's starting to dry. No, it's not. Like I said, this was just cut yesterday. This is extremely heavy, very wet, and this probably weighs 50 pounds. So not dry at all. So if you see wood that's not cracked at all, very heavy, and you can identify it, it is not dry wood. So we're gonna split this and I'll show it to you in just a minute. This right here is a piece of willow. We just cut this, and you can see here, I brought this out just to show you, for example. You can see the moisture here. If you guys can see the water, the wetness right here, that's all wet right there. This part right here is dry. Now willow dries fairly fast, and this was just cut a couple days ago, but you can see the water on this. Now the other reason I brought this out, you can see all these lines through here, these dark lines. This is starting to rot in the middle here. So it's not gonna be good in the middle. I mean, it'll still burn, but again, it's a piece of willow, but it's very wet, very, very heavy. This piece right here probably weighs, boy, I bet this is 70, 80 pounds, maybe more. The other end you can see is gray, but it is very, very wet, very heavy. So if you see moisture, if you can actually see that it's wet. So I just split this round in half here. Like I said, it's a piece of cottonwood, and I can actually feel it. You put your hand on it, it's just wet. I mean, wet. And when I hit it with the splitting mallet, water actually squirted out. Here's a piece that's dry, super light, nothing to it. This one is extremely heavy. It's a bigger chunk, but this weighs probably 10 times what this little light guy does. So if you have a piece of wood that you get from someone and you split it open and actually is cold, even in the summertime, if it feels cold and it feels wet, it's wet, even without a moisture meter. And that's the main reason why I did this, just to show you things to look for to get good wood, to get dry wood, and to get wood that'll actually burn. So if you don't have a moisture meter and you don't really know what to look for, there you go. I gave you some tips, and hopefully that'll help. So now, if you're buying wood from someone, some of the things you should ask. Number one, how long ago was it cut and split? If they say, oh, long time ago, well, that's not the right answer. You want to hear a specific amount of time. You want to hear 6 months, 8 months, a year. You want to also ask, was the wood on the ground to dry? If it was on the ground, it's going to be sucking up moisture and it's not going to dry very good. If it's on pallets or on runners or stringers and it's stacked or piled on pallets, that's a good thing. You don't want it to just be on the ground. That's bad. You also want to ask, was the wood loaded with a skid loader to where it was just a bucket and it was scooped off the ground? If it was loaded with a skid loader, there's a really good chance it was on the ground. You're going to get a lot of dirt. You're going to get a lot of bark. You're going to get a lot of debris, branches, rocks, mud, crud, stuff you don't want. Sawdust mixed in with it. I've had people I've delivered wood to that have bought from me that previously bought from another person, and that other person brought them along with a 2/3 of a cord of wood in a dump trailer. They also got 4 or 5 wheelbarrows full of debris, dirt, mud, crud, rocks, nasty crap, stuff you don't want. That's not how you want your wood to be delivered. You want your wood to be clean. I hand load mine for now. There may be a day we use a grapple where we grab it and set it. We may use a tumbler someday where we're going to have a disc cleaner, or the wood will be tumbled so that all the debris is taken out of it, which is what the big producers do. Someday I may do that. So that's something you also might want to ask is, you know, when the wood is loaded, is it tumbled first? Is it cleaned first? Is it hand loaded? All the things that make the wood better. Now, if you live in an area like, say, the northwest part of the United States, Washington State, Oregon State, those are states that it rains like, 1,000 inches of rain a year, hundreds of inches, a lot of rain. We don't have that here. We get rain here, it comes, but then we're dry for days, weeks, and then we get rain again. It's not always rainy here. We have wind here all the time. We have a lot of sun here where we store our wood, so it dries very fast. So if you're in an area that is a very humid, very rainy climate, you're going to want to find out, is the wood stored off the ground? Is it covered on the top so that the rain runs off? That's important. Here it's not as big of an issue. If you're in the southwest, you're probably not going to have any moisture at all. You're probably hardly ever going to have rain. Your wood is probably going to dry very fast. But you'll also be limited to the kind of wood that you can get. For instance, a lot of the western states, they have 2 kinds of wood. They have pinyon pine and ponderosa pine. They have lodgepole pine, maybe 3 kinds. That's it. That's all they have. They have pine. And yes, pine is fine. Pine burns just fine. As long as it's dry, that's all that really matters. So by no means is this everything to look for. These are just some of the indicators to look for when you're buying wood, or if you're looking for wood for yourself in the woods that you've got stored, things to look for to make sure it's dry. These are all things you can do without using a moisture meter. The sound of it, the weight of it, the feel of it, split it open. Like I said before, putting your lips up against it. If it feels dry, it's probably dry. If it feels moist, it's probably wet. The time that it's been drying is also an indicator. In your area, you are going to know if 6 months is long enough, or if it takes a year, or if it takes 2 years. If you've got your pieces that are just bigger chunks, they're going to take longer to dry. If you split them smaller, where they're only 2-3 inches thick, they're going to dry a lot faster. Those are all things to consider. There you go, folks. I just showed you some things to look for when you're buying wood. If you're going through your own wood and looking for wood that's ready to burn, wood that's dry, those are some of the indicators to look for. Moisture meter would be the ideal thing, but if you don't have one, or if you're just making sure you want to get good wood, look for the things I just talked about for indicators to make sure you're getting decent wood. That's all I got for today, folks. You know what to do. Poke the buttons. See you tomorrow morning, 5:30 a.m. with another video. Right now, go watch all the rest of the videos. There's 1,300 on my channel. You probably want to watch them. Good night, Irene.